I made the deal.
Oh, God.
Video footage?
I've emailed it to all of you.
Oh my god, I'm so excited.
Excited? I'm fucking terrified.
Fear of death will do that to you, my friend.
Saw the video footage. It really is happening then, isn't it? Finally. Finally our lives will completely turn around. I thought I'd be excited when this happened, or terrified. But I'm not really sure what to feel. It's just happening.
I understand, Roland. I feel the same way. But if it all goes according to plan, it won't be too long. As you know, it won't happen right away. I'm having the Harbinger deal with some bottom feeders before I set them on you. This serves the dual purpose of gaining the Harbinger's trust and performing some last-minute tests with the ritual.
Those test subjects of yours won't rise up for long, right?
Of course. I mixed in limitation runs with the symbolic formula to make sure that the subject will die after a few seconds. As long as they rise up at all, we'll know it was a success. Then I simply remove the limiters when the time comes, and voila.
I know it's a little late to be saying this, but are you sure this will work? I mean, will it really believe that bullshit about making zombies?
It does not care what my goal is with these rituals, as long as it gets an entertaining hunt. You see, creatures such as the Harbinger may seem devilish and cunning on the surface, but really, they are quite simple-minded. Most of their prowess as hunters comes from their instinct, rather than strategic thinking. That, combined with its borderline god complex, makes it so that it would never even entertain the possibility of being outsmarted by a lowly human. I could go on and on about the psychology of such creatures, if you wish.
No!
Sorry, I thought it might make Roland feel better.
I suppose you're right.
Just make sure that you have your axe ready. If the Harbinger gets bored with hunting you, the whole plan could fall apart. You are all the most powerful seers I have to come to know these few years. I trust that won't be too much of an issue, correct?
Course not.
Fuck yeah.
Yes, I suppose so.
Excellent. With your cooperation, it won't be long before we all ascend. The following months were filled with bloodshed. Though I had initially been skeptical, the Harbinger soon began to realize that Adrian's claims were entirely true. Its first victims were what his benefactor described as monster hunters. Those who used the black arts to target monsters and either kill or seal them away. Personally, I find those people to be fools, Adrian had complied. They believe they're righteous warriors of justice, saving the world from one evil monster at a time, or some nonsense. Ha! In reality, they're little more than pest control. They only have enough power to put down the most inferior and feeble-minded of beings, and barely enough to seal away some of those on a higher level. None of them could even hope to defeat a monster such as yourself. But believe me, they will try. Many of them had died doing so. Each of the hunters provided more entertainment than the Harbinger had in years. Most operated on their own, but those who were in close proximity to one another actually banded together to engage in their little hobby. Some of them were intimidated when faced with a challenge that was the Harbinger, but having been approached by creatures of the unknown many times before, they did their best to use their weak incantations and rituals to get rid of it. Some of the less experienced ones, who couldn't have known how much of a threat it really was, even went as far as to taunt and threaten the beast. It was all quite amusing, watching the insects and their false sense of gratifer fall apart as a Harbinger haunted them day and night. To perform the rituals, I would wait until nightfall to take its victim to a deserted building, such as an abandoned warehouse. Adrian requested that a video camera be set up so that he could observe, which was no easy task for the Harbinger's long, clawed hands. All of the rituals were highly complex, requiring overly specific procedures to perform. It needed to carve a particular series of symbols and runes into the walls in a particular order, facing a particular direction, and at a particular time of night. What was even more convoluted were the necessary actions. During one ritual, the Harbinger was required to move 2 steps back, stab the victim in both of their legs, move 2 steps forward, and then scratch their eyes out. Then it would wait for 5 seconds before biting the victim's nose off and leaving them to bleed out. Considering how much these procedures caused the victim's suffering, the Harbinger had no issues with performing them, and actually enjoyed it to a degree. Though one strange commonality that all the rituals had was a final procedure. The Harbinger would carve a symbol identical to the unknown one in Adrian's basement, and simply stand in its center. Then, it would recite the same incantation 13 times before killing the victim and allowing their blood to pool into the symbol. After this, it would wait several minutes to see if the dead human revived, but never once did the ritual succeed. The Harbinger brought this up with Adrian one day after its 10th kill. "Your primitive little rituals do not appear to be succeeding. Do you still truly believe that the dead can be brought back to life?" "Theoretically, everything checks out," Adrian said, frowning as he looked over a diagram featuring a strange pentagram-like symbol. "Honestly, I don't know why this is happening. Maybe the Seers' mental energy just isn't powerful enough?" The Harbinger was well aware that that problem was probably more fundamental than that. He did know a great deal about the Black Arcs, after all. It was already a being with a powerful connection to the higher plane, and thus had no need for them. But over the centuries, it had managed to pick up a few of the basics of sorcery, and after remembering some of that trivial knowledge, it remembered that there were a few faults in the procedure Adrian had been performing. The way he was arranging the symbols and runes, they were geared to perform the basic function of displacing energy, which was probably just causing the victim's psychic power to be sapped away before it could be used to trap the soul. Although he was somewhat confused by the contradictory nature of Adrian's ritual, it did not say anything. The Harbinger realized that the reason Adrian had made a deal with it was in order to test this ritual, which meant that as long as the ritual needed to be improved, the arrangement would continue. Thus, he resolved to allow Adrian to continue his foolish escapade until either he figured the problem out on his own, or the Harbinger grew tired of his hunts. Ideally, he wouldn't figure it out until he wanted him to, at which point his ritual would be a success, and his ego would be at an all-time high. That would be the perfect time to bring about his ultimate downfall. Satisfied with this little scheme, the monster continued to humor the man. "Is there no way to gauge a seer's mental capacity?" "Yes, it should be possible to judge how strong someone's psychic connection is based on the level of incantations they can perform," Adrian replied. "But that doesn't mean I know everyone's psychic potential. I can't force everyone on my site to undergo a test. That said, the ones I've been sending you after are, to my knowledge, relatively weak. I've been saving the bigger fish for later, since I'm sure neither of us wants to waste those too early on." The Harbinger perked up to this. He watched Adrian roll from one side of the room to the other in his swivel chair, as he picked up another diagram. "And why would you assume that of me?" it asked. "It makes no difference to me what my victim's psychic potential are." "Oh, but it does, Harby." Adrian was quick to respond, putting down his diagram and looking up at the being. "Mind if I call you Harby?" The Harbinger took a long step forward, growling as it glared down at him. "Don't tempt me, human." Adrian chuckled. "What is that, your catchphrase or something?" he teased. As much as the Harbinger wanted to skewer one of his legs on the spot, it restrained itself. The sense of safety the man was beginning to feel around it would only serve to make his death all the more delicious. "Anyway, do you remember the day we met, when you mentioned that I might be a psychopath? I did a little research on the subject, and I discovered that I actually fit the bill quite nicely. But for that matter, so do a few of my friends." He picked up a Rubik's Cube and began to fiddle with it. "The more I thought about it, the more I realized that the more powerful seers were all quite similar in disposition to me. Those I know to be higher on the spectrum are more selfish, vain, and uncaring, while the very skilled at acting like they aren't. A few of them even admitted to being psychopaths or sociopaths when I told them I was the same. To simplify, I can only surmise that the more powerful one's connection is to the higher plane, the more of a monster they are." He chuckled again, and haphazardly threw the cube over his shoulder. Quite fitting, wouldn't you say? Interesting, the Harbinger simply replied. And would that not make you the king of the human monsters then, Bishop? With that knowing grin, Hadrian threw his swivel chair to face it. I suppose it must. A few weeks later, the Harbinger wiped out most of the remaining monster hunters. By the end of the 5-month killing spree, however, it had been feeling increasingly drained of energy. He wasn't sure if it was simply out of shape, or if the incantations and curses the hunters had used had actually had some effect. Either way, it did not inform Adrian of this development. It was not about to show weakness in front of a lowly human. That morning, as it entered the man's basement to receive its next assignment, it found no one. Even the 2 caged humans were now gone, leaving only bloodstains where they once had cowered. As it prepared to wait for Adrian's arrival, the Harbinger was suddenly overcome with a strong feeling of uneasiness. It knew this was its instincts, alerting it to something unusually supernaturally powerful. But it was more than just the arcane images the room was plastered with. It felt familiar, in fact. It began to look around the dark room for the source of this disturbance, and its eyes came to rest upon the symbol carved into the floor in the center. It hadn't noticed before, but that large, circular symbol appeared to be faintly glowing. What are you doing sulking in the dark down there, Harby? Adrian's voice rang out from the top of the staircase as he flipped on the light switch. The Harbinger didn't reply, as it watched him come down the stairs. I suppose you finished off Turner, then, he said, taking a sip from a cup of coffee. Good. I believe this would be a good time to start aiming a bit higher, wouldn't you say? You speak of more gifted seers, the Harbinger asked. Adrian set down his cup and moved over to a swivel chair, plopping down into it as always. Indeed, but this time, don't be surprised if they are actually aware of your existence, he replied, retrieving his laptop from a table. The monster hunters were very vocal about their experiences. I've done my best to restrict information about you, but word of mouth spread swiftly. The creature scoffed. Their struggles only make my hunt sweeter. Let them come. That's the spirit, Adrian chirped. Now, your next target is someone I'm quite familiar with, in fact. He's one of the greatest seers I've ever met. He began typing away at his computer once again. His name is Roland Whittaker. Unlike your previous targets, this guy doesn't actually have an address. He's somewhat of a nomad. He has a lot of money, so he travels around, never staying in one place for too long. So you do not know his whereabouts? The Harbinger asked. Presently, he's in Liverpool, England. Seems he's staying in a hotel called the Nadler. But believe me, he's a slippery fox. He's eluded many hunters before, both human and inhuman. The Harbinger eyed the man. I thought you would be wise enough to not question my skill by now, human. Adrian shrugged. Fair enough. I know your kind has their ways when it comes to tracking people. Just rest assured, this hunt will take longer than any of your others. As it turned around to leave, the Harbinger took one last look at the symbol in the center of the floor. It had stopped glowing, but the monster still felt uncomfortable just looking at it. Bishop, he called. I have remarked that you have me draw this symbol during each ritual. What is the accursed thing's purpose? Adrian hummed, looking away from his computer screen and down at the symbol. Oh, that? It's just a Type 7 spell circle designed to enhance the incantation. That's why you step into its center. That is one from a failed experiment. Before I contracted you, I tried to perform the ritual on a regular person, and failed. That's all. The Harbinger made an approximation of a frown with his vertical mouth. Although the explanation seemed somewhat dubious, it didn't care enough to inquire any further, and soon went on its way. Adrian let out a heavy sigh as soon as his partner was gone. Glad this over for now, he said. Can't believe 5 months have already passed. Wow. Well, at least the fake footage is finally finished. He trailed off as he looked over to the cages, remembering that they were now empty. Oh, right. And so, my monologues are now reduced to mere soliloquies. Oh, the shame. He mused. Still no response. Perhaps I'll get a new pet after all. Gosh, Rollin, you haven't a clue how stressful it can be keeping up a cool front with that monster around. Sometimes it looks like it's about ready to slice me in half.
Isn't that the idea?
Well, I suppose so. But I come last, remember. Anyway, I've sent him after you. Not to worry. The tests were a complete success. If everything goes smoothly, you will officially be the first one for us to ascend. Isn't that exciting?
Somewhat. Though I'm a bit number than I thought I would be. In any case, footage.
Already sent. As you can see, the experiments went swimmingly. Hello?
So that's what Ascension looks like. Not what I expected. And why does the camera cut out at the end?
Well, it's a powerful process. A measly video camera can only pick up so much. In fact, I had to buy a new camera each time because it kept getting fried. A lot of footage was destroyed too. What a waste. I can't say I fully understand it. We're dealing with a higher plane here, after all. But it seems the transformation emits some kind of energy wave that fries all nearby electronics.
I see. When should I expect to see the Harbinger here?
A day or two, I suspect. But be prepared at all times.
Oh, not to worry. I am.
2 months. For over 2 months, the Harbinger chased Rollin Whittaker around the globe. It remembered the first trap that tricky weasel had laid for it. In room 206 of the Nadler, several overworldly beasts awaited. The place was covered in spell circles presumably designed to attract the demons, which immediately attacked. Enraged by the audentations and cowardly tactic, the Harbinger dispatched them all, going so far as to use one of the wolf-like things as a weapon to beat the other two to death. The spell circles Whittaker left made it easier to track him, since the trail of energy left by their caster could be followed, much like how a bloodhound follows a scent. However, at each of the new locations the Harbinger thought he might find his victim, another trap laid waiting. Sometimes they were similar in nature to the first, and other times they were even more drastic. At one point, Whittaker must have realized that the spell circles made him easy to track, so he set explosives to blow up an entire motel while the Harbinger was inside. Of course, all this did was kill a few humans, but it was quite an amusing sight for the Harbinger to behold. In fact, many of Rollin's traps involved sacrificing the lives of his fellow humans, while the Harbinger found to be the one with the most entertaining parts of the hunt. For once, it felt as if he was chasing down a fellow monster. Albion, a greatly inferior one. By far the most entertaining trap he had laid out was the final one, in which he revealed himself and contorted the Harbinger head-on. It took place inside the gymnasium of a small elementary school in some backwater Scottish town. Rollin stood on one end of the gymnasium, the Harbinger on the other, and the entire school's student body stood between them, crying in fear and horror, as their teachers lay dead around them.
You should be thankful, monster.
Rollin proclaimed.
I've done you a favor of guiding you to this wonderful little buffet here.
He held up a small device as he stared at the monster. Rollin was a tall, muscular man with graying hair and a confident, stoic posture.
But I'm not that nice of a person, as you can probably tell. Here in my hand I have a trigger that'll detonate an explosive. Of course, I'm not expecting that this will kill you. You've proven your endurance more than enough. The point is, it'll kill these children. So I ask you, what would provide more pleasure? killing little old me, or these wonderfully terrified kids?
The Harbinger let out a light chuckle. Its chuckle quickly erupted into a laugh, one so loud that even the confused children could hear it in the back of their little minds. This was perfect. Looking into his eyes, it could tell that this man thought he knew how to think like a monster. He thought that he and the Harbinger were the same, and it was absolutely hysterical. The Harbinger didn't stop as he dashed forward, reaching Lannin in the blink of an eye. Before he could react, it sliced its claws through his tender flesh, ripping his arm right off. Lannin screamed almost as loudly as the children, who were apparently smart enough to see their chance and began running for the exit. But it didn't care about them. The Harbinger made a twisted attempt at a smile as it dug its claws into the man's shoulder and began dragging him away. The following torture lasted another 2 weeks. The Harbinger wasn't sure if Whittaker was an extremely resilient man, or if he simply lacked emotion. Either way, it took a very long time and a variant of different tactics to finally get him to crack. Adrian, seeing that his partner was having some trouble, even offered some advice. "Try something a bit slower," he'd say. "Trust me, with people like him, the elegantly simple methods are most effective. You'll have to be patient, but it'll be more than worth it." While the wait annoyed the Harbinger, Adrian had been right. The satisfaction of finally seeing Lannin Whittaker burst into tears after having to be sit in the dark room with only the sound of water dripping was enough to make it all worth it. And so, the time for the ritual. The Harbinger dragged a shivering, near-dead Lannin into the center of the room, in some abandoned factory. This time, Adrian had requested a very large room, and a much greater variety of symbols. But as it was setting everything up, the malformed beast noted that Adrian still hadn't corrected the fundamental mistake in the ritual's symbolic code. It would only result in another failure. It was just about to start setting up the camera when Lannin whispered,
What is this?
"That is none of your concern."
No, this is...
He stuttered, letting out a few coughs as tears formed in his eyes. He kept trying to look around the room, struggling to move himself with the 2 bandaged stumps that were once his arms.
God, no. This isn't how it's supposed to go.
He mumbled, letting out another few coughs.
This isn't how it's supposed to be set up.
Now he was shouting feebly.
It's wrong. No, this can't be happening.
The Harbinger perked up at this. It seemed that the man had caught on to the fault in Adrian's ritual. It made sense. He was also well versed in the black arts after all. But the Harbinger couldn't allow its benefactor to hear of this, so it stopped setting up the camera and moved towards the now hysterical Lannin.
No, I don't want to die. I want to be like...
He was cut off all too abruptly as the Harbinger suddenly reached 2 large fingers into his mouth and proceeded to rip out his tongue. Now with Lannin screaming, he went back to setting up the camera, placing the tongue somewhere away from the ritual. The rest of the procedure went smoothly. The Harbinger had grown quite accustomed to the rituals by now, so it had no trouble performing the designated actions, which weren't too different from the usual. As expected, Lannin didn't come back to life either. It was only after the ritual ended that things became problematic. As he was about to chop up Lannin's body to dispose of it, the Harbinger was suddenly hit with a dizzy spell. "What is this?" it muttered wearily to itself. Its vision blurred as its senses began to numb as it struggled to stay standing. It was unsuccessful. The Harbinger groaned as its knees buckled and it fell to the ground. There it stayed for several minutes, grasping its head as it tried to get its mind in order. It had never been experienced anything like this before. The Harbinger's thoughts were jumbled and unfocused. It wasn't sure what to make of anything. What was it doing? Where was it? Why was it here? All of this normally obvious information seemed to have slipped its mind somehow. All it knew was that it had just killed someone. Answers began to come to the Harbinger as the fog in its mind cleared, allowing it to think normally again. Its eyesight refocused, and it regained its bearings. However, it was more confused than ever. What in the world had just happened? In all its centuries of living, it had never experienced such a lapse in concentration, such weakness. Though it still wondered about the cause, it absent-mindedly continued going about its duty, slicing through the dead flesh before it with a reckless abandon, allowing blood to splatter all over. Later that evening, after it had dropped the remains in some nearby lake, the Harbinger decided to take a walk. The sun had set, leaving only the streetlights to illuminate the dark sidewalk. As it walked, it pondered, or at least it tried to. But it was tired. It couldn't think properly. Creatures as powerful as it didn't need to rest, so it didn't understand why its mind was so blank all of a sudden. Perhaps, it reasoned, this would simply stop after a time. The Harbinger's thoughts were interrupted as a deafening scream pierced the air. "Oh my God! What is that thing? Run!" Looking ahead, it noticed several teenagers running in the opposite direction, screaming in terror. They had seen the Harbinger. "Impossible," it muttered, looking down at its hands in astonishment. It had not consciously chosen to show itself. Normally, it should still be concealed under the vein of the higher plane. Why, then, had those kids been able to see it without it allowing them to? It highly doubted they were all seers. There was simply no way, it thought. The Harbinger lunged forward, its long strides allowing it to catch up to the group of three in mere seconds. A boy looked behind him and screamed out in horror as the Harbinger's claws came down, piercing his skull and putting an end to his wailing. A girl shouted, "Terry!" before tripping and falling. The Harbinger didn't even look at her as it crushed her skull underfoot and jumped into the third boy. Instead of immediately killing him, and simply observed him for a moment. He was absolutely hysterical, of course, and was struggling to get free from underneath the beast. But he didn't appear to be looking directly at it. It seemed that it was finally concealed again, like it ought to be. Feeling at least somewhat relieved, the Harbinger simply sliced his neck and rose up. The Harbinger tried to think of what to do with the bodies, but it found that it couldn't. It didn't really feel like thinking about such trivial things now. All that mattered was returning to Adrian and receiving his next assignment.